Hey Titans, now I want to talk to you about grading and how you're going to be graded because that's probably the most important thing in the class to most of you. There's actually two separate grades. They're equal grades that you get for each project, but they're separate. So for example, you have a product grade, which is pretty easy to explain. At the end of every project, you won't actually print them out most likely, but at the end of every project, you're going to actually have a finished product. This is an example of the zoo sign project. This is the first one. You're going to do multiple ones, but this is the first zoo sign project. So when you hand this in, I go over it with something called a rubric, which I'm sure most of you have heard before about a rubric, where I look at different things. These are the things you're trying to accomplish, and then I check to see whether or not you've mastered it, in which case you'd get the highest point value. If you just kind of lightly showed it, you might get a lower point value. If you didn't show it at all, then you'd get a 0 in that category, and then I'd add up your totals. So the things in the rubric are mainly things like tool use. Did you use all the tools that you were shown in the video? Did you at least try each tool that you were shown? You get points for being self-regulated, so were you basically pushing yourself forward, or were you constantly asking, what do I do next? Were you checking the Prezi to see what you could do next yourself, or were you asking me? Were you asking me all of your questions, or were you trying to figure things out yourself by using my sign up front that tells you how to help yourself with the videos, handouts, and things like that. If you're pushing yourself forward, you're getting points for that self-regulation. But there's also things like file organization, which is whether you're naming your project correctly, the file name when you're starting the project, which is always on my board, or that's something that you could definitely ask me if you're unsure, because it's an easy 10 points that all you have to do is type in the correct name. Concepts that are covered in the videos, things like whether things contrast or not, which you might not understand now, but you'll understand as you watch the videos. Okay, so as I said, the first thing is your product grade. So depending on if you're good at art and good at using the computer, I basically look at this, look at the rubric, and give you points based on each of those categories that I just talked about. And then I put in whatever number you earn. So what is this other grade? What does TOT stand for? Well, that stands for time on task. How much time are you actually spending in the class each day actively working on your projects? If you're someone who's constantly checking your phone or dealing with your music, which I give as a reward sometimes, if you're someone who's constantly talking to your neighbor and you don't have your hand on your mouse, or I catch you looking through the internet all the time, those are ways to lose time on task points. And every time that I see that you're off task, I realize it in my brain, I give you a warning, and then at the end of class, when I sit down after everybody leaves, I give you a time on task grade for that day. So if I see that you were off task 3 times, then you might have lost the majority of your points for that day, because each day you have the opportunity to get about 10 points of that time on task. If I see that you're constantly working, or maybe you just slip up once, you'll get a much higher time on task grade. Another way to think of time on task is to think, well, am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing for the vast majority of the time? Meaning, if you're supposed to be watching a video that I made to tell you how to do something, you should be watching that video during that time. If you're doing anything else other than watching that video, you're losing points. Even if you're just working on the project, you're losing points because you need to watch the video to know what to do. Otherwise, you're just guessing what to do, which is also, unfortunately, probably going to cause problems that make your product grade go down as well. So one of the most important things, and the easiest grade really, is the time on task. All you have to do is do what you're supposed to be doing. If you're supposed to watch a video, watch the video. If you're supposed to apply the video to your work, that's what you should be doing with that time. So it's an easy way that it benefits people who basically don't think they're that good at art or might have trouble with computers, is to just make sure that you're always trying your best, and I see that you're always working. If you're giving up and you're just saying, oh, I don't feel like doing this anymore, I'm going to do something else, that's where it doesn't become a benefit to you anymore, which it should be because it's the easiest grade. Instead, you're hurting your own grade. Let me give you some examples. So, for the product grade, we're going to use this example, which I would say is probably like a B+, maybe an A-. But we're going to say B+ for this example. So something close to that would get you an 88 for your product grade. But let's say the person, even though they did a fairly good job, they didn't really try anything extra. They were able to do that easily because they happen to be good with computers and art, but they didn't really go out of their way to make something amazing, which is really the point. So their time on task, they rushed it basically is what I'm saying. Their time on task is going to be like a lot lower. So we're going to say that that's a 70. All right, so what is the average of those two numbers? Well, to find out, not that this is a math class, but to find out, you got to add the two together and then divide by the number of grades that there are. So if I add those two together, I'm going to find out that they almost had an A, but then when I looked at their time on task, I saw that it was kind of low. They could have definitely spent more time on their project, which brings them all the way down to a C+. Okay, so you can see how that can affect you in a bad way if you're not doing what you're supposed to do. Alternatively, we're going to take a different example, a different way. Let's say the person's artwork isn't quite that good. It's like a low B, so like let's say an 80. Okay, so they're almost at a C, unfortunately. Maybe they had trouble using the computer, or maybe their artistic knowledge just isn't that good. They weren't able to create something that looks good, so it lowered their grade. However, their time on task is a 96, which means the vast majority of the time they are doing what they're supposed to be doing. They're watching the videos, they're talking to their friends to try and find out things that they don't understand or don't know, and then they're using that knowledge in their project. So 96% of the time, they're on task. Occasionally, they change their song, something like that. They go to the bathroom, whatever. So they lost a little bit of points, but they're mainly, on course. They're in good shape. So what is their average here? Well, if I average the two together, they're at an 88, which is a B+. So they rose their product grade significantly, almost to an A, just by doing what they're supposed to do for the vast majority of the time. Okay? So that's how time on task works and how it can really benefit or hurt your grade if you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing.